Our second panel discussion today is on PropTech and the changing face of real estate, and it is moderated by Tom Davy, real estate partner with Mason Hayes and Curran. And on his panel are Brian McElligott, partner and head of artificial intelligence, Mason Hayes and Curran; David Hickey, managing director, Lugus Capital; and Caroline Pontifex, Director of Workplace Experience, KKS Savills. But just before we begin, we're just going to have one more poll question. And again, we would invite everyone to vote on the poll through the app. And that question is, what will the average daily rate of office occupancy be in Dublin in 2026? Will it be between 30% and 50%? 50% and 70%, or 70% plus? Now, over to you, Tom.
Great, thanks, Tom, and welcome everyone to this engaging session exploring the immense potential of artificial intelligence, or AI, and other technologies in the built environment. This session will serve as a platform for deep diving into the practical applications and benefits of AI in enhancing innovation, efficiency, and sustainability within our built environment. Join us as we embark on this enlightening journey into the realm of AI in the built environment, encompassing both its possibilities and the necessity for responsible governance. Now, if you thought that intro was a little bit over the top, it's because it was created by ChatGPT in about 60 seconds yesterday. So apologies in advance, and hopefully nobody has left the room. More about that later, and maybe we'll turn to a more real-world view and open with you, Caroline, if we can. So Caroline, in terms of Savills and Savills clients, what are both Savills and your clients using in terms of AI and technologies? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, we're probably using pretty much the same amount of AI in our business that I would expect you all here to be using. So, for instance, Microsoft Dynamics, or the whole Microsoft suite's got lots of embedded AI in it. We're using IntraHive, which means that every morning when I turn on my email, I get a whole intros into everybody that I'm meeting to that day. It pulls down information about every company that I'm engaging with that day from my diary. The worst thing about it is that it will combine diaries. So, for instance, we went to MIPIM this year, and about 100 or more of us went to MIPIM. All our diaries were dredged by the AI, combined together, and you could see everybody, every connection and cross-connection across there, so we could make the most of the week. But the downside was the fact that I'd left my leg waxing appointment on there, so that got put into the schedule, like everybody else's. Not great, so that's one thing to learn. Put personal on all of your diary appointments that you don't want dredged by AI. We're using AI program called Leviton to look at our lease extractions, so to read the leases. We're using ReadSoft for object character recognition, where that's on our property management services, so all the invoicing that they do goes through that. We're using various bots, both residential and in our rural energy sectors. And we've just bought a company called BrickBite that can automatically space plan for us. However, it's only designed for the German market, so that where you've got particular building types with set parameters around window-to-window dimensions and things like that, it can do beautiful rectangular buildings. It hasn't been able to transfer its knowledge over to the medieval sort of plannings that we've got in the City of London. So a lot of development has to go into that. So basically, it's everywhere, but it's all off the shelf, which is what I expect most of you using it for. And when it's, at the moment, what we're not seeing is that leap from purpose designed, programmed AI into certain applications, because the return on the investment at the moment is looking, certainly for a company like Savills, is where do you put that? So we prefer to go down the route of buying off-the-shelf products and applying it when it's well and truly tested, rather than develop it ourselves.
Okay. David, how are investors using AI and other technology in sort of assessing decisions, and where does technology sit in terms of an investor's list of priorities?
Sure, thanks, Tom. I think it's fair to say when you look at the real estate sector and compare it to other investment classes within alternatives, it's very much in its infancy in terms of leveraging and using AI and technology. However, I think that's probably the most exciting part for us within the industry. But that is changing. And when you look at, say, there was a survey done in 2019 looking at global trends impacting global real estate. Top of house was climate change, which we'd expect, but PropTech was 6th, which I think if you were to do that survey today, it'd be very different. And you've seen that through just M&A activity within PropTech, and Caroline touching on some of the acquisition activity that they've been under. So it's very much its infancy, it's starting. In my own, I suppose the way I think about it, within the investment cycle, you've got investment underwriting, you've the diligence of assets and the operating performance of assets, and then thirdly, you've got the kind of the selling and buying of assets. And I think the third piece is probably the more advanced, in that you've got great Irish businesses like BidX and Offer, who are supporting the sales transaction. But I think going back to the very beginning on the investment side, I think there's significant opportunity around how we collate our data, how we collate non-standard data, how we leverage that data, and that to make better informed investment decisions. We're seeing some of that probably more so in Asia, where AI and technology is being leveraged to a far greater extent around real estate valuations. But again, as I say, it's in its infancy, and it's going to be an exciting journey.
Okay. Brian, you're the tech guy, obviously. You've no ties, so you're telling everyone you're a tech guy. What uses are your clients putting AI to? Hopefully better than my intro there this morning. But what are you seeing?
Well, first of all, everyone should know that I threatened Tom with coming here in a dressing gown this morning, just to prove how
It's a big improvement. Yeah. Thanks, Brian.
I think your intro there with ChatGPT is like a fantastic kind of dive in, or dipping the toe in the water of AI for all of us. We're doing a lot of work at the moment with clients who are bringing that type of technology into their businesses for use with interacting with their customers. So a typical example would be, a client who has a business where they do a lot of their customer feedback interaction and relationship management via the web or a web app. If you bring one of these large language models in, what you can do is you can speed up and standardize how you interact with your customers. So you can, let's say at the end of a chat, you can very, very quickly summarize what the conversation was about, which is very helpful if you're dealing with complaints. When the customer agent on your side of the business is, let's say, typing a response to the customer, ChatGPT or one of these other models can automatically prompt what the answer will be based on a whole bunch of other answers you've given previously. So if you just do the first 3 words, you might get a block of a paragraph appear for the agent, and they'll just send that out to the customer. Another simple mean that we're seeing an awful lot of is where the agent is dealing with a customer, and let's say it's getting a little bit tense, the conversation. You can automatically adjust how that conversation is looking. So a block of text appears and you go, no, more friendly, no, more formal, and automatically it just rearranges. So it's incredibly, I would say, powerful and incredibly useful. But to go back to Tom's example at the very start of the session here, it's incredibly clumsy as well. So everything that gets done is done and then monitored or overseen by a human, who then decides that, yes, it is okay to release this answer or this piece of text or this email or this letter out to the customer, the end user. And that is the predominant example we're seeing at the moment. But it's funny, the contracts just keep coming in from our clients, and they're going, oh, actually, I'm going to go with this other large language model provider, and we're going to do this other use case. The use cases are starting to stack up quite quickly, but they're all in the area of dealing with customers, dealing with queries, dealing with text. Sophisticated examples, let's say in real estate or in the medical sphere or in banking and fintech, they're not quite there just yet. But it's certainly, come along with a bang, and everything you're seeing in the news is kind of what we're seeing from a client perspective as well.
Okay. David, you mentioned climate change a few moments ago, and obviously, it's top of the agenda. I think it's fair to say also of increased, diligence, auditing, scrutiny around sustainability. What role does the data you're talking about play in those sort of sustainability-related decisions?
Look, as you say, and it was in the earlier panel as well, look, it is top and central, ESG. The one thing I would say is a lot of the discussion earlier was around new builds. And I think the data collection around new builds is easier, and the accreditation is easier. I think where it's going to get more interesting and equally more challenging, and I think where we'll need to explore ways of leveraging technology, is when you start thinking about refurbishing, repositioning buildings. The reality is we can't, we talked about the availability of land, but there's a lot of existing buildings which are no longer fit for purpose. And how we reposition those buildings, but then equally tell the story around the sustainability of that refurbished building, both from the asset owner, but then equally how you share that with your occupier and how the occupier will use that building going forward. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that story is told, and I think we'll need to use technology, but equally technology will only be as good as the data that we can collect and the information we can get. So it's evolving, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
All right. Caroline, on the operational side then of buildings, what are you seeing technology and AI doing in terms of that assessment of environmental performance, sustainability of buildings?
So we've already seen a huge amount of smart technology move into new builds, which is a great harvesting of data. So in terms of valuing an asset in the future, we should be in a position where we've got very specific data on the validations of services and all those sort of things that allow us to pinpoint recycling or refurbishment and maintenance issues much more specifically. I think where we have active technology working at the moment is, for instance, some of our properties that are managed, AI links up the building services systems to weather forecasts and things like that, so that we can anticipate what temperature the building needs to be in when people arrive, and that aspect, which really is improving those ESG those goals. But I think you're right in terms of it's very much around that power, that predictive analysis, where we see the real future of that. At the moment, we've got some vast database sets that tell us everything from lease expiries to pre-planning applications. We've got the whole of cities mapped out in 3D and looking at what's coming up in those cities. The City of London, I can tell you, if I've got a client that's looking at one tower, I can tell them what's other towers that are going to be in their sightline within the next 10, 20 years and so forth. And it's those linking those big data sets together in terms of valuation and in terms of speeding up and automating the process of strategic thinking that I really see the value of the PropTech and the AI coming in, especially around, we're talking about the ESG, sustainability, being able to design with that high level of predictive analysis is going to be essential, especially when we start evaluating the refurbishment or rebuild questions, to be able to not just link in the calculations of if we cut and carve this building, how much concrete are we going to pour in to get a viable product out at the end of the day compared with new build, and what's the ongoing life cycle costs of new build compared with the refurbishment, et cetera, but also looking down the line, actually, what's the population, what's the requirement coming in the 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 years of that building life cycle, and is the investment required actually going to live up to what we're predicting in the future. And all of that at the moment is done manually. It's all done manually, and we need to be able to be much smarter in the way that we're looking at that. And that's where we really see the value of this coming in.
Yeah, it seems to be a classic opportunity, doesn't it, for the use of data and AI. And David, then turning to maybe, increasingly then buildings will hold, in some cases, very valuable data, right? Whether that's an office building or it's retail, it's a shopping centre or something. Is there a valuation question then around that building when it carries that data with it?
Look, I think it's undoubted. There's no, real estate's becoming more and more operational. You can see that the way investment businesses are setting up themselves, and that is no longer just buying a piece of real estate and outsourcing day-to-day management. They're now internalizing their management teams to a far greater extent. As part of that, there's real value by collecting information and data, and I think you got to look like the way the residential market's changing, the hospitality, student housing, and even like shopping centres, and the move to turnover-based leases. That's all data-led. So how you as a landlord can articulate that story around why your asset is outperforming its peers. It's one thing saying that it's a great piece of real estate and you've got a whole bunch of tenants filling it, but actually how is it performing? What's the spend? What's the profile? Is there other ancillary incomes that can be generated from that data? If you can articulate that to a potential buyer, there's no doubt you'll get a better valuation. However, I would see in kind of a double-edged sword, though, in the future, if you're not able to tell that story and you're not able to speak to some of the more nuanced kind of detail around the asset, I think it'll have a negative impact on your valuation. So, I think it's getting more and more important. Investors are placing more and more importance on that potential kind of almost risk-sharing performance with their tenants and the people who use the piece of real estate.
Okay. So Brian, turning to you then, David's telling us that this data could really go to value in terms of the building. If that building is being sold, who owns the data, and what sort of restrictions might apply if you want that data to go with the building in effect?
Absolutely, and I think there's probably a micro and a macro thing going on here. The first thing is, let's say, the building itself. The building will be made up of, let's say, a bag of data. And within that bag, you're going to have flows of data from different people who use the building, but also remember that the data has to come from somewhere. So it comes from a supplier or a manager managing a particular service. The data itself is not attached to the building, it's attached to contracts, essentially. So if you have someone who's operating a security system, there is a relationship there between the owner or the manager and a security company. Now, everybody's well aware also that, you can't just do what you like with security footage. It's all a highly regulated area with regard to GDPR. But the people who operate in the space of technology around artificial intelligence are also incredibly good with manipulating data in a manner that can be compliant. What they do is they tend to derive information from the data sets themselves. And while that will appear as nothing but, numbers on a spreadsheet to the naked eye, there's value to a machine there. So There is a way of taking information from an apparently difficult regulatory, let's say, sector and making use of it. Then you also have information flowing from tenants in buildings. You have information flowing from other providers within the building. And I think it's something myself and Dave have spoke about many times before, is there's a lot of value in the aggregate of all the data. And that's where I think you move to the macro. If you take the construct of the building and all of the various pieces of data flows you have there, now kind of zoom back out to the neighborhood. There's the school, the shops, the types of houses there, church, no church. You've got a lot of information about a neighborhood, and the people who are in the technology space that will supply in the artificial intelligence in time are very good at being able to manipulate that data set to give you what you want. So the investors, for instance, can say, I want to find out X, Y, and Z about this area, because if I know, a greater amount of detail about this area, I will be able to calculate, what to build, where to build, what the yields will look like. So there's an incredible opportunity there, like Dave said, when it comes to taking that data, manipulating it in the correct manner to give the sort of analysis and results that are of value to the industry. And I've seen it done, and it is possible. There are challenges with regard to, scraping data from websites. Just because something is in the public domain does not mean you can take it and do with it what you want. There are rules around that as well. But there is an incredible opportunity there, I think, with regard to the technology being married with the data and the desires of the people who act in that space.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So shifting gears slightly then, there's an ongoing debate, I suppose, around AI, some anxieties maybe about it relative to, the potential for it to replace certain human roles, human input, or is it more so a case of, supporting those roles and doing certain things that humans don't really want to do, like the heavy data, reviews and so on, data mining and so on. Caroline, could you talk to us a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of reluctance to embrace it, or, is it sort of open arms? I suspect not, and how that might kind of differ across different sectors.
Absolutely. So it's a great question in terms of, are our jobs all going to die with this?
That's really what I meant.
Yeah. Will we be actually earn a living? And especially, we look at the area of negotiation, brokers, agents, and so forth. And there are PropTech apps out there that purport to threaten that relationship between buyer and broker. Really interestingly, Facebook has developed AI that can effectively beat top poker players at poker. So AI has learned how to bluff. And when we say bluff, AI is basically just a sledgehammer breaking codes, a massive code breaker. So we try not to put these anthropological kind of terms, amorphic terms to it. They're not human, it's just code breaking. AI in certain fields is really gaining strength in negotiations. So Walmart, apparently 68% of their negotiations are now done by AI. So they're buying packets of crisps and loo rolls and stuff like that, so they can put chatbots or run their AI systems, gather the data that's needed to, have you met the safety checks, or et cetera, et cetera. And you can see a potential application for that. Certainly, I think that we'll see it come faster in the residential market than maybe in the commercial real estate market, which is highly complex. But I can see a point where, just as holidays and buying insurance have, we can plug in our requirements and we get the entire internet at our disposal and compared websites and so forth, that you will eventually be able to do that with negotiating on residential real estate. And maybe that will really suit the Gen Zs of the world who don't like, so much personal interaction. And maybe they're quite happy to negotiate the next rent that they pay via AI. I don't think it's ever going to take the place of the strong strategic thinking that comes through in negotiations. It will certainly allow a lot of the real, just the grunt work of sifting through information, sifting through ticking boxes, doing your matrix, have we ticked every box, have we got every standard, etc. in place. But the real emotive part of a negotiation is still, I think, the domain of the human people. We want to speak to humans, and that's one of the things that we see when we're looking at the chatbots in just where we have them deployed in our sector. We quickly, somebody will answer a few questions and they'll quickly want to go and speak directly to a human. And there's a value in that human interaction, and we'll probably end up placing a much higher value on that interaction as time goes forward, rather than the sort of automated tasks. Great, they get us to the point where we can start actually doing the real work of strategic thinking, negotiations, interactions at the top level.
So we all breathe a sigh of relief, maybe, or at least for now. Dave, similar experience in the sort of investment market, and then maybe a tricky question: have you ever negotiated a deal with a robot?
I'll answer that first, no. But I am slightly, after listening to Caroline, I am slightly curious by it. I think it could be a bit of fun, but no, I haven't. Look, whether AI and tech will replace people, coming at it from a very narrow perspective, which I am, on the just straight up investment side, I don't think so. However, I do think it will be a tool that investors will use. I think you can't lose, I don't think we'll ever see a scenario where a good investor who prices risk appropriately, there's a lot of subjectivity and learnings come into that, and I think the opportunity set for AI and tech is to assist that around, particularly when I think about like a junior an analyst starting in a team. There's a lot of data aggregation, stratifying of data, collating it, putting it together to form a kind of a set of, ultimately get some form of predictive views on what they're going to think about the investment, and then they go up the line to their seniors. I think a lot of that will be done through technology, and I think for the junior people coming through, I think that'll be really interesting, because they'll cut to the chase around where they start taking views on the investment opportunity quicker. So I don't think it'll replace, I think it'll actually just enhance people's day-to-day job. I think those who come at it with kind of scared of it, I think will miss the boat. In my own experience, once there's genuine commitment within an organization to put it in place, you can demonstrate to people that it's going to make their day-to-day jobs better. I think there's generally it's met with enthusiasm, and I think that I don't see that changing.
Okay. So Brian, we've heard about some of the uses of AI and other technologies, and we've all seen in the media and so on sort of highly publicized concerns raised around the pace of progress and so on relative to the sort of regulation and control of AI in particular. Where does that regulation and control sit at the moment?
Well, it's closer than you might think, and I don't know if anyone has been following this, but there would have been a lot of publicity last week around a draft of an AI Act coming out in the EU. So what you have is, let's say, on an international view, the EU, as usual, kind of taking the robust first mover stance with regard to regulating the market. And they produced a piece of legislation which is based in product safety law. So it's not coming from traditional kind of tech avenues, it's coming from product safety law. So they're going to treat artificial intelligence from a product safety perspective and regulate it in that manner. And for certain applications, let's say the use of AI in lifts in a building, that use will have to be pre-cleared with a regulator and get a CE mark or some form of a stamp of approval before it will be allowed to be used on the market. So what you're moving from is a scenario of technology being launched on the market at an MVP stage and then being iterated on according to what the customer or what the market likes, moving to a stage where if this tech is in there and it is regulated, the tech company almost has to treat it like a medical device or a pharma product and get it ready for the market and get it approved before it goes out there, which is a huge change, an absolutely massive change for the tech industry. The same laws will apply to the likes of the medical device industry, but they already have this, regulatory kind of aspect built into their products. They know how to do that. The tech industry doesn't know how to do that. So that's what's coming, and that's really, really robust. And, to answer the question of, will the machines take us all over, I think the EU has kind of got our backs in that sense, in that, the critique coming from the US and the UK is that's too much. You're going to stifle innovation, kind of back off. Because the UK has taken the stance of, we will ask regulators who usually look after this sort of technology to take a kind of a certain type of a view of it under new guidelines, but they won't introduce law. The US is then a little bit further behind, and their view is, well, we may introduce laws, we may not introduce laws. A few kind of bite-sized type applications on the legal side have come in over there. But you can see how the concerns generally in the market are, this is incredibly powerful technology and it could have a lot of poor outcomes for people. So you have the EU picking up the baton there, which they began, by the way, like four and a half years ago with this piece of legislation, and they're calling it trustworthy AI. So that is being looked after. But then you have the flip side where a lot of people will argue that it's actually going to stifle innovation. And in particular, if you have, a nation of SMEs here in Ireland who are really strong on the tech side, if they're being asked to treat technology in a manner equivalent to, let's say, a medical device or a product, they're going to suffer serious, I suppose, setbacks in trying to meet those regulatory standards. So it's very much in flux, which I guess reflects what you're reading in the press, and you see that primetime reports during the week as well. But we are definitely going to a highly regulated space here. It's just that not everything will be regulated, so it's important to keep a view on it.
Okay, so the pace of change is pretty fast. I think that's sort of undeniable. Caroline, what do you think then? And maybe it's a tricky question. What do you think is coming next in terms of technologies for the built environment?
We're already seeing, especially in design, we're seeing automated design packages, programs coming along, which I don't see them usurping the role of architects or designers. I definitely see them as aiding and supporting. So, for instance, going back to the residential sector, you can take a photograph of the room that you have that you want to be your kitchen, load it up into the AI system, and it will come back with multiple different designs with all the componentry for that kitchen space planned, 3D visuals, look and feel, the whole lot, priced, etc., etc. Now, when you apply that on the commercial sector, what you're doing is the hours and hours and hours it takes our designers to go through different catalogues and meet different reps and all this sort of thing to keep designing the same products over and over again. I can see it really aiding us in that, and being able to, at the touch of a program, being able to find product ranges from around the globe that meet sustainability requirements, that meet transport, when we factor in how far is it coming from, can we refurbish it, life cycle costs, all of those sorts of things, to be able to take the hours of work out of doing that would be huge in my particular small sector of the built environment. I can see in, as we're talking about residential sales, there are already starting to be talks of the squeezing out of the portals such as Rightmove, Zoopla, and so forth, by Siri and Alexa and those sort of AI systems where you can start to just say, upload your Pinterest page of your most aspirational house if you can afford it, and say, I would like to find a 3-bedroomed house with heritage, barn conversion, whatever it is, in this part of the world. Can you go find me? And Alexa comes back and says, yes, we've got 2 of those and they're X amount of millions and it's above your budget, don't worry. But it's those sort of, so many of these processes that are about uploading manual information up onto portals, and being able to cut out that and automate that is where there starts to become efficiencies for the consumer, there starts to become efficiencies for the architects, designers, and so forth.
Okay, and David, similar view on the investment side? Is it more about kind of working up what we have and the data, or do you see new technologies coming into that area?
Look, I think, say from my own business, like we're a small business, we wouldn't have the capital to go and invest heavily in systems, and there's no, I stand corrected, but there's no obvious kind of off-the-shelf technology to assist with the investment piece at the moment. But I think there's no doubt the larger global real estate guys are thinking about how they get edge. It's a competitive environment. Leaving the regulatory piece aside, I think you're going to see people use technology to think about the non-standard information, so scraping other types of information, whether it's from social media platforms to form views on what a particular area might look like into the future. So I think it's evolving, and it's evolving quickly.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to go to audience questions now. Tom, if you're happy to take those.
Tom. Just the first question in here, and I'd ask people to continue to submit questions, as if we don't get to them, we'll certainly follow up afterwards. Question here, how is technology and hybrid working impacting the design of offices of the future?
Caroline, that naturally sits with you, doesn't it? I don't think you can avoid that one.
Okay, so we're starting to see optimization happening within that. When you look that you track occupancy rates, and we're at the moment trawling occupancy rates across loads of different data sets, whether it's the commuter transport systems, pret-a-manger, all of these sort of things, as well as an individual occupier and what their utilization from their swipe card to their desk booking to whatever it is. But you're looking at that, and then you can start to optimize, how many trains and buses do we put on because we know people are starting to travel and they want to come into town? How many do we close down certain parts of the building and not put on staff because we're only going to fill it, it's Friday, we're only going to fill it for 20%. We're already starting to see, there's a council in the UK, South Cambridge Council, using AI to optimise their workflow to go to a 4-day a week. So quickly we're starting to see, they're working out their bin collection based on all the traffic information for the day to make sure that they can do their bin collections in 4 days rather than 5 days. So they can start making it attractive to come and work for the council because you've got a 4-day a week. And you can start to see how organisations can leverage this sort of technology to make their decisions around, how much space do we take? Yes, we're already using it a lot in that. But going forward, how much space do we actually actively manage on a day-to-day basis, and how much, wider, how much do the city then start to work out its infrastructure programs and its transport connections by those kind of data sets, moving on a dynamic, daily, moment-by-moment basis.
And another question, Tom. The AI Act seems to be focused on technology rather than physical assets. How will it really impact the BE or built environment?
I'll take that one. Yeah,
I think I could answer that.
I think I've actually probably mentioned the example already where there are specific product categories called out in the Act itself, like a definitive, exhaustive list of categories which are called out as high risk, and they will be regulated more significantly than anything else. And in one of those categories, there's probably a couple of examples in there, but one of them I recall is definitely like the use of services and facilities in buildings like lifts, and that will take a provider of that, which is quite traditional technology, into a whole new sphere when it comes to, let's say, explaining issues with the training and test data sets they use to train the safety component of lift, putting in risk management systems, keeping technical documentation, informing users about how to keep it, keeping those technical documentation for a period of up to 10 years post-launch. So it's a significant change in that sector also.
And another question from the floor. If you could design one tool to assist the investment process today, what would it do for you?
I guess I'll take that, but I've kind of touched on it already. It's about collating and stratifying data as the first step. That the information that you have and the tool that you have will only be as good as the information that you can accumulate. But if there was a tool out there that took your standard, your typical real estate information, like you got to remember, commercial real estate, the administration of commercial real estate is extremely archaic. So if there was tools out there off the shelf, ideally at a very efficient price model, that would assist through that process, but then equally you could point it towards other non-standard information, assuming all the regulatory side checks out. And then thirdly, you then can overlay as the investor some of the more broader macro type kind of variables that you want to put into it, whether that's interest rate movements, GDP growth, whatever it may be. If I could pick a tool to do all of that, it would make the whole initial piece of investment analysis very, very efficient, and obviously would drive a lot of, just speed things up and make your pricing discussion much more detailed and helpful.
Okay, does anyone else want to come in on that, or?
No, I think that's covered well.
Well, look, thank you very much then Tom, Caroline, David and Brian for a fascinating discussion.